Enjoy the orchard? That was the text. 3 words, no punctuation at the end, sent at 6:47 in the morning while I was elbow deep in apple peels at the farm stand, getting ready for what was supposed to be Grandma Maeve's 82nd birthday picnic. I read it twice. Then I read it again, because my brain wouldn't let it land. Enjoy the orchard, from my dad. Not, happy birthday to your grandmother, or heading over later, or even one of his usual one-word grunts like K when I sent him the schedule. Enjoy the orchard. I put the peeler down very slowly and wiped my hands on my apron and called my sister. Tell me you're already up, I said. I've been up since 5. What do you think? She said. Sloan works in compliance at a regional credit union, which is the kind of job where you're up before the sun, whether you like it or not. Why? Did Dad text you anything weird? Define weird. I read it to her. There was a long silence, the kind of silence where you can actually hear someone's brain rearranging itself. Sloan is 28, 3 years younger than me, and she has a way of getting very quiet right before she gets very loud. Enjoy the orchard, she repeated. Yeah, like, enjoy the orchard, she repeated. Yeah, like, enjoy it, like a parting gift. That's what I'm asking you. Hold on. I heard her tapping. I'm in the Trust portal. Hold on. I should back up. The orchard isn't really an orchard anymore, not in the commercial sense. It's 12 acres in the rolling part of central Pennsylvania, a Dutch colonial farmhouse my great-grandfather built in 1924, 2 barns, a cider press my grandfather restored in the 80s, and roughly 200 apple trees that my grandmother had been gradually letting go wild since my grandfather died. We sell pies and cider and pumpkins in the fall out of a little farm stand I run on weekends. It's not a business. It's a feeling. It's the thing that made me a person. When my grandfather died 7 years ago, he set up a revocable living trust for my grandmother. The trust held the house, the land, a brokerage account, and a money market fund that he'd been quietly feeding for 40 years. My grandmother was the primary beneficiary. My mother and her brother were the secondary beneficiaries. And the trustee, the person who actually had the legal authority to move money around and sign documents on my grandmother's behalf if she became incapacitated, was my mother. My grandfather, God rest him, thought his daughter was the responsible one. He was, in his defense, working with limited information. Sloan was a successor trustee. That's the part nobody really paid attention to at the time. If my mother stepped down or couldn't serve, Sloan would take over. My grandfather added that clause maybe 6 months before he died, after a long conversation with Sloan about the difference between a bond yield and a coupon rate. He liked that she actually knew things. Okay, Sloan said, and her voice had that compressed, careful sound it gets when she's trying not to scare me. There's a wire that went out yesterday afternoon. From the money market, $60,000, to an account I don't recognize. To Dad's account. I don't know yet, probably. Let me pull the routing. I sat down on the little stool by the back door of the farm stand and looked out at the pickup trucks already parked along the gravel by the cider barn and tried to remember how to breathe like a person. It's a Wells Fargo account, Sloan said. Different routing than Mom's checking. Different from Dad's payroll. Where's that mean? It means they opened a new one. Or it means they're using somebody else's. Either way, that money is gone. It cleared this morning. It's gone. I looked at the text again. Enjoy the orchard. They left, I said. Pull up Mom's location, Sloan said. Her location still shared with me from that Cancun trip. Pull it up. I opened the app with my flour-dusty thumb and watched the little blue dot do its loading thing. Then it resolved. San Jose, Costa Rica. I want to be clear about something, because I went over this in my head about 1,000 times in the weeks that followed. My parents are not stupid people. My mother went to Penn State. My father has a master's in supply chain management. They've been married 33 years. They go to the same Episcopal church every Sunday and serve coffee in the basement after the service. They are not, on the surface, the kind of people who forge an old woman's signature and flee the country. They are the kind of people you'd ask to watch your dog. But I had been noticing things, small things, for months. The orchard property had been looking rough, not catastrophically rough, but rough in a way that didn't match what my mother was telling Grandma Maeve about all the upkeep she'd been overseeing. The side porch had a rotten board that had been rotten since July. The fence by the back pasture was sagging where a tree had fallen on it during a storm in May. The roof on the cider barn was missing shingles in a pattern that meant whoever last looked at it had not actually looked at it. Every time I mentioned it to my mom, she'd say, "Oh, honey, we just had Doug out. It's all under control." There was no Doug. I asked. There has never been a Doug. The other thing I noticed was the mail. Grandma Maeve still lives in the farmhouse, in the downstairs bedroom my grandfather converted for her when her hip started acting up, but my mother had been collecting her mail to organize it. This had started about a year ago. I came over one afternoon to drop off rhubarb and saw a stack of envelopes on my mother's kitchen counter, addressed to my grandmother, all opened. Bank statements. A property tax notice. Something from a title company in Harrisburg. I asked about the title company envelope. My mother smiled the way she smiles when she's about to lie, which is a particular smile she has cultivated for 33 years of marriage and uses also at church potlucks. "Just an insurance thing, Ren," she said. "Don't you have to get going?" My name is Ren. I should have said that earlier, Ren Castellanos. I'm 31. I run the farm stand on weekends and I work in the development office at a small liberal arts college during the week, which means I spend half my time writing thank you letters to alumni and the other half deciding which jam goes on which shelf. It's a good life. It used to be a quiet life. I told Sloan about the title company envelope when I got home that night. I told her about the mail. I told her about the mail. I told her about Doug. She listened the way she listens, which is mostly silent, and then, at the end, asks one question that turns out to be the only question that matters. "Ren," she said, "when was the last time Grandma actually signed anything?" I thought about it. I thought hard. "I don't know. Years." "Right," she said. "So how would we know if a signature was hers?" "That was in late August. The text from my dad came on October 4th. So when Sloan said they left, and the blue dot said San Jose, and the money market said negative $60,000, I want to say I was shocked. I want to say I gasped, or cried, or threw the peeler against the wall. I didn't do any of those things. I sat on the stool in the back of the farm stand and I thought, there it is. They actually did it. They actually went and did it. And then I thought, thank God, Sloan started moving things in September. Because here's what happened in September. Sloan sat me down at her kitchen table and she said, "I think we need to look at the trust documents." Like really look. Not the way we looked when Grandpa died. The way I would look at a member's file if I were investigating fraud. We spent a Saturday at her kitchen table with the original trust binder, a yellow legal pad, and a pot of coffee that we drank entirely. Sloan found 3 things. The first thing she found was that my mother, as trustee, had taken out a home equity line of credit against the farmhouse in April. A HELOC for $95,000. The signature on the application, when Sloan pulled it through her professional channels, don't ask, did not match my grandmother's signature on the trust documents from 7 years ago. It was close. It was a real attempt, but the loop on the M was wrong, and the way my grandmother makes her E's, slanted and almost like C's, was not there. It was my mother's writing trying to be my grandmother's writing. The second thing she found was that the brokerage account had been drained of about $38,000 over the course of the summer, in transfers of $8,000, $9,000, and $11,000. Just under the threshold that would have triggered a federal reporting requirement. Whoever did it knew exactly where the line was. The third thing she found was the title company letter. My mother had initiated a quit-claim deed process to transfer the orchard property out of the trust and into a new LLC. The LLC was registered in Delaware. The registered agent was a service company. The managing member was listed as my father. "They're trying to sell it," Sloan said. "They can't sell it. They're trying to sell it, Ren. They're trying to sell it, Ren. They're going to sell the farm. They're going to sell the house. They're going to sell Grandma's home out from under her." I want to tell you what I felt then. But the truth is, I felt a kind of cold that I'd never felt before in my life. It wasn't anger. Anger came later in bursts, and I'd manage it, and then it would come back. What I felt at Sloan's kitchen table was the cold that comes when you realize the floor you've been standing on isn't a floor. It's a thin layer of paint over a hole. I thought about my grandmother, who is the kindest person who has ever lived. I thought about how she still makes a sour cream apple pie every Sunday and brings half of it over to the neighbors. I thought about how she taught me the word for the smell of the orchard in the fall, which is petrichor when it's wet, and something else, something we just call October when it's dry. I thought about how she had no idea on earth that her own daughter was signing her name on documents that would take her home away from her. Sloan said, "Okay, we have a problem." I said, We have a lot of problems. She said, no, we have one problem. The problem is they're going to keep doing this until they get caught, and we don't want them caught the slow way. We want them caught the way that ends it. Here's what Sloan did. As successor trustee, she had standing to request a co-trustee modification with a doctor's letter for Grandma Maeve. Grandma had been showing some mild memory stuff for a year or so. Nothing dramatic, but enough that a sympathetic geriatrician at the clinic in Lancaster was willing to write a letter saying my grandmother would benefit from additional fiduciary support. That letter, plus Grandma Maeve's own signature, real this time, witnessed by two of her bridge friends and a notary Sloan brought to the house on a co-trustee amendment, put Sloan on the trust alongside my mother, co-equal. Either signature could authorize a transaction. My mother didn't know. We did it on a Tuesday morning while my parents were at a wine tasting in Sonoma, which they had paid for, we later learned, was my grandmother's money. The day Sloan became co-trustee, she made 3 phone calls. First call, the brokerage firm, freezing all withdrawals pending dual authorization. Second call, the bank holding the money market, doing the same. Third call, the title company in Harrisburg, instructing them in writing, on letterhead, that any quitclaim deed action regarding the orchard property required her signature as well as my mother's, and that any document submitted with only one trustee's signature was void. Then she did the part I didn't know she was going to do. She moved the money. Not all of it. That would have been too obvious. She moved the money market and the brokerage account into a new trust account under her sole signatory authority as co-trustee in a different bank entirely, on the grounds which were legally defensible. She had checked with an estate attorney that week that there was credible evidence of fiduciary breach by her co-trustee and a duty to protect the corpus of the trust. She left a balance in the old accounts. A small balance. About $1,500 in checking. Enough to look like an account that was still active. Enough that if someone glanced at it, they wouldn't immediately panic. Enough to be bait. And then we waited. For 3 weeks, we did nothing. We went to family dinner on Sunday. I brought the salad. My mother asked how the farm stand was doing. I said it was doing fine. My father grilled steaks and talked about a new set of golf clubs he was thinking about. We hugged my grandmother goodbye. Sloan watched everything with the still, attentive face of a person who is documenting. She had also, by then, made copies. Copies of everything. The forged HELOC application, the brokerage transfer history, the title company correspondence, the bank statement showing the structured withdrawals, the Delaware LLC paperwork. She had emailed copies to her own attorney, to me, and to a forensic accountant friend of hers from grad school who agreed to review the file pro bono because, in her exact words, "This is the kind of thing that makes me feel alive." I asked Sloan once, in that 3-week stretch, whether we should just call the police, whether we should just end it. She said, if we call the police now, they'll tell us it's a civil matter and refer us to an attorney. If we let them try to take more, it becomes a pattern of fraud. It becomes elder financial abuse. It becomes a federal interest the moment they cross a state line with the proceeds. We want them to do something stupid. We want them to do the stupidest thing they can possibly do. Like fly to Costa Rica. Like fly anywhere, she said. But Costa Rica would be ideal. I don't know how she knew. I really don't. Maybe she was just being aspirational. Maybe she'd seen something in my mother's browser history once. But 3 weeks after we made our preparations, on the morning of October 4th, my dad sent me a text that said, "Enjoy the orchard." And the blue dot was in San Jose. I called Sloan back after I'd had a minute to sit down. They're in Costa Rica. I know. What do? We let them realize, she said. We let them realize by themselves. Here's what I pieced together later. Partly from text messages my mother eventually sent me when she was trying to explain, partly from credit card statements that came out in discovery during the legal proceeding, and partly from a very long, very tearful phone call from a hotel concierge in San Jose who'd been told he'd be reimbursed and was now beginning to suspect he would not. My parents had put down a deposit on a villa in Tamarindo, not a vacation rental. A purchase. They had been working with a relocation agent for about 4 months, since June, who had walked them through the Costa Rican property purchase process. The villa was $410,000. The deposit they put down, with the proceeds of the structured withdrawals from the brokerage account, was $45,000. The remaining $60,000 of their cash on hand, which they'd wired from the money market the day before they flew out, was supposed to cover the next milestone payment, plus the first few months of living expenses. They had bought one-way tickets. They had assumed, I think, that by the time anyone noticed anything, they would have already sold the orchard. The quitclaim deed was supposed to have been finalized in late September. The buyer they had lined up, a developer who wanted to put 28 houses on the property, was supposed to wire $1.1 million at closing. From that, they would pay off the HELOC, send my grandmother some token amount. This is the part that makes me coldest. The part where they had decided in advance what number constituted enough for the woman who raised my mother, and pocket the rest, then a quick transfer to Costa Rica, and goodbye. What they did not know, on the morning they boarded the plane in Newark, was that the quitclaim deed had been frozen by the title company 3 weeks earlier. They did not know that the HELOC, which they had been making interest-only payments on, was now subject to acceleration because the underlying collateral was in dispute. They did not know that the money market had been swept. They did not know that the brokerage account had been swept. They did not know that my sister had been a co-trustee for 23 days. They did not know, when my mother got to the closing agent in Tamarindo with the wire instructions for the $60,000 milestone payment, that the wire would not arrive. It would not arrive because there was nothing to send. The milestone payment was due on October 6th. My mother, according to text messages she later sent me from a hotel computer, had walked into the closing agent's office with a hard copy of what she thought was a successful wire confirmation. The closing agent had checked. The wire had not landed. The closing agent had called the bank. The bank had told her, politely, that the originating account had been frozen for suspected fraudulent activity, and that the funds in question had been returned to the trust. My mother had stood in the closing agent's office in Tamarindo in October, in a linen dress she had bought specifically for the move, and watched her future evaporate in real time. The villa fell through. The deposit was forfeited. The relocation agent stopped returning calls. The hotel they were staying in, which they had prepaid for the first week and intended to extend, required a credit card on file for the extension. My mother's credit card was declined. My father's credit card was declined. Their joint card, which was tied to the brokerage account that had been swept, was declined. They had about $1,100 in cash between them. They tried to call my grandmother. My grandmother, on Sloane's instructions, did not answer. They tried to call me. I did not answer. They tried to call Sloane. Sloane answered. I wasn't there for that call. But Sloane told me about it afterward, sitting in her car in the parking lot of a Wegmans, eating an apple, with the kind of calm that I have only ever seen on her face once or twice in my life. She said our mother cried. She said our mother said there had been a misunderstanding. She said our mother said she was going to fix it as soon as she got home. She said our mother asked Sloane to wire her enough to fly back because the tickets were one way and they hadn't budgeted for return. Sloane said, I'm not authorized to release trust funds for that purpose. Our mother said, I'm the trustee. Sloane said, not anymore. There was an amendment. I'll send you the documentation. Also, you should know that we have evidence of forgery on the HELOC application, structured withdrawals from the brokerage, and an unauthorized quitclaim deed attempt on the residence. I'll let the attorney decide what to do with all of that. In the meantime, I think you and Dad should figure out how to get yourselves home. Then she hung up. It took them 11 days to get back. 11 days of churches and hostels and one very tense call where my dad tried to reach his brother in Cleveland for money, and my uncle, who has known my father for 64 years, said no. They ended up flying into Newark on a one-way ticket that my mother put on a maxed credit card that approved a small overlimit charge, the kind of thing that happens once in a lifetime when you're truly out of options. They took a taxi from Newark to my grandmother's house because the car they had parked at long-term was not actually their car. The car had been leased through a small business entity my father had set up years ago, and the lease had not been paid in 2 months, and the leasing company had repossessed it from the long-term lot. They arrived in the driveway of the orchard around 11 at night on October 15th. My mother was wearing the same linen dress. My father was unshaven. They had 2 carry-on suitcases between them. They stood in the driveway looking at the porch. The porch light was on. I was inside, with my grandmother doing the dishes from a chicken pot pie I'd made earlier. Sloane was in the living room with a folder open on her lap. My mother not. I opened the door. I'm going to tell you something I'm not proud of, and also something I am proud of. I'm not proud of how much I enjoyed that moment. I am proud of how much I enjoyed that moment. I am proud that I didn't show it. I said, "Hi, Mom." My mother started to cry. My father stood behind her, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 11 days. My grandmother came around the corner from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and she looked at her daughter for what felt like a long time. Then she looked past her, at my dad. Then she said, very softly, I think you'd both better come inside. We sat at the dining room table. My grandmother sat at the head, where my grandfather used to sit. Sloane sat to her right. I sat to her left. My parents sat across from her. There was a folder on the table. My grandmother said, Sloane is going to tell you what we know, and then I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. Sloane laid it all out. The HELOC forgery, the brokerage withdrawals, the quitclaim deed, the Delaware LLC, the villa, the wire, the dates, the amounts, everything. She did it the way she talks to her members at the credit union when she has bad news, which is gently, with full sentences, without any embellishment. My father at one point put his head in his hands. My mother kept opening her mouth as if to interrupt and then closing it. When Sloane was done, my grandmother said, You took from me, Diane. My mother said, Mama, it wasn't. You took from me, my grandmother said again. You forged my name. You tried to sell my house. And then you flew to Costa Rica with money that wasn't yours, expecting that by the time you came back, I would either be dead or too confused to know what you'd done. My mother started to say something. My grandmother held up one hand. The hand was steady. I had never been prouder of anyone in my life. Here is what is going to happen, my grandmother said. You and your husband are going to repay every cent that was taken from the trust. The HELOC will be repaid out of the trust funds that Sloane recovered, and then the trust will be reimbursed by you with interest on a schedule that our attorney will draft. You will not contest this. You will not delay. If you do, we will refer this matter to the district attorney's office, where Sloane has already, on my instruction, made a preliminary inquiry. The investigator she spoke to was very interested. She paused. You will not live on this property. You will not visit me without calling first and being invited. You will not, under any circumstances, contact your daughters about the trust, the estate, my health, my finances, or my decisions. Anything you need to communicate about those topics, you will communicate through our attorney. She looked at my father. And you, Mark, you let her do this. You signed papers. You boarded a plane. You let your wife steal from her own mother. So I want to be very clear. I am not your enemy, but I will never again be your friend. You're not welcome at this table. Please remove yourself from it now. My father stood up. He looked at me. I looked back at him without expression, which is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life and also the easiest. He walked out onto the porch. My mother stayed. Mama, she said. Mama, please. My grandmother said, Diane, I love you. I will always love you. But you broke something tonight that I don't think can be fixed. You broke it months ago, actually. I'm just learning about it tonight. Please go. My mother went. I want to tell you that they ended up in a homeless shelter or in prison or destitute. They didn't. They ended up in a one-bedroom apartment in Reading that my father's brother eventually agreed to co-sign for. They are both working. My mother is at a paint store. My father is doing some kind of consulting on a contract basis. They are repaying the trust on the schedule the attorney drafted, which is generous, because my grandmother insisted on generous. The HELOC has been paid off out of recovered trust funds. The orchard is intact. My grandmother still lives in the farmhouse. The cider barn got new shingles in November. The side porch got a new board, and the fence by the back pasture is straight again. I oversaw all of it. I had the time because the farm stand is slow in winter, and because my grandmother liked having me around. Sloane comes on weekends. We work together. We do not really talk about our parents, except occasionally, when one of us will mention something small, and the other will nod, and we'll keep going. I don't know if I forgive them. I'm not sure I'm supposed to. I think what I've decided instead is that forgiveness is not really my job. My job, the job my grandfather set up when he made my sister a successor trustee 7 years ago. The job he could see coming when none of the rest of us could, was to protect a kind woman from people who claimed to love her. We did that. We did it together, my sister and I, and we did it without ever raising our voices, and we did it within the law. And we did it because we are the people my grandmother raised us to be, even when our own mother forgot how. I make sour cream apple pie now, every Sunday. My grandmother taught me the recipe in November. I bring half of it over to the neighbors. The smell of the orchard in the fall when it's dry is what we call October. She still tells me it's the most important thing. I think about that morning in the farm stand a lot. The peeler in my hand, the flour on my apron, the way my phone buzzed and the world rearranged itself in 3 words. I think about what my life would look like right now if my sister hadn't sat me down at her kitchen table in September and said, "We need to really look." If we had kept telling ourselves that Doug existed, if we had kept believing that mothers don't do this to their own mothers, the thing nobody tells you about being lied to by the people who raised you is that the hardest part isn't the lie itself. It's that you spend years afterward trying to figure out what was ever real. Did my mom love the orchard the way she said she did when we picked apples there as kids? Did she mean it when she told my grandmother she'd take care of things? Or was every Sunday dinner just rehearsal for the day she'd take it all and run? I don't know. I'm not sure I ever will. But here's what I learned. Kindness is not the same as blindness. My grandmother is the kindest person I have ever known, and her kindness almost cost her everything, not because kindness is a flaw, but because she trusted that the people who shared her blood would handle her trust with care. Trust without attention is just an open door. The world has a way of walking through open doors. What protected my grandmother in the end wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was attention. Sloane noticed the patterns. She did the boring work of pulling statements and comparing signatures and reading the trust binder line by line on a Saturday morning when she could have been doing literally anything else. She didn't yell. She didn't post about it. She just paid attention and then she acted, and she did both of those things, within the law and within her own sense of what was right. I think that's what character actually looks like when nobody's watching. It looks like a folder. It looks like a folder. It looks like keeping your mouth shut at Sunday dinner, because the long game matters more than the short satisfaction. My mother and father chose a different path. They chose the shortcut. They thought a plane ticket and a forged signature could buy them a villa and a new life. And the math made sense to them only because they had stopped seeing my grandmother as a person. The moment you stop seeing someone as a person, every theft starts to feel like a withdrawal. Every lie starts to feel like a logistics problem. That is the road my parents went down, and the orchard they ended up with was not the one they were promised. They ended up with a 1-bedroom apartment in Redding and a repayment schedule and a grown daughter who answers the phone through a lawyer. If you take anything from what happened to my family, take this. Protect the people who can't protect themselves, especially when the threat is someone you love. Pay attention to the small wrong things, the rotten porch board, the open mail, the contractor who doesn't exist. Build the paper trail before you need it. And when the moment comes, act with steadiness instead of noise. The orchard is still standing. My grandmother is still in her chair at the head of the table. That is not luck. That is what attention and patience and quiet courage can build, even against your own blood.